It's Blair, and tonight, I have a question for you. Think about the last time you went away. That deep feeling of escape, of finally being somewhere truly safe. What if I told you that feeling is a lie? The stories we're exploring tonight aren't about ghosts in the attic, they're about something far more terrifying. Because it's real, they're about predators found in the last places you would ever expect. A quiet grandmother's house in the countryside. A sun-drenched resort in the Bahamas. A cozy lodge, deep in the mountains. After hearing these allegedly true accounts, I can promise you one thing. You will never look at an empty hotel hallway the same way again. But our first story tonight doesn't begin in a hotel hallway. It starts somewhere much closer to home. A place that should be the very definition of safety. It comes from a listener named Aiden, who was 15 at the time. He and his brothers were spending the weekend at their grandma's house. In rural Vermont, for them, it was the closest thing to a vacation, a huge private property where they could just be kids. The evening started normally, but after dinner, his grandma looked out the window and pointed. The door to the large Morton building on their property was wide open. That's when the first feeling of unease set in. Aiden's own words, that confused me, because we didn't even go into the Morton building. A simple, logical thought. But logic has a way of dissolving when you're standing in the quiet dark, and your instincts are screaming that something is wrong. Aiden quickly asked his brothers. A series of sharp, hushed denials. None of them had been in there. The unease in his gut tightened. He went to his grandma, who was sitting in the living room, trying to enjoy the quiet evening. "Grandma," he said, his voice low, "the Morton building door is wide open. Did you go in there?" She looked up, a little annoyed at the interruption. "Of course not, dear. It was probably just the wind. Don't worry about it." Aiden shook his head. The wind can't turn a handle and pull a heavy door open. He was trying to keep his voice steady, but a tremor of adrenaline was starting to run through him. This wasn't right. The thought of a break-in, out here in the quiet woods, felt both absurd and terrifyingly real. He decided he had to see for himself. He walked to the front door, the old floorboards barely creaking under his feet. The house was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. He reached the door, his hand hovering over the cool brass knob. He leaned in, pressing his face close to the decorative glass panel, peering out into the deep Vermont twilight. And he froze. His breath caught in his throat, his heart gave a single, painful thud against his ribs. At the bottom of the porch steps, shrouded in the gathering dark, was a man. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there. Motionless. A tall, thin silhouette against the black canvas of the trees. Aiden let out a choked sound, a sharp, profane whisper into the silent house. It was just enough to alert his grandma. "What is it? What do you see?" she called out, her voice laced with a new anxiety. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He was transfixed by the figure. His mind was racing, a primal instinct screaming at him to protect his family, to confront the threat. His hand tightened on the doorknob. "Aiden, don't you dare open that door." His grandma's voice was suddenly sharp, terrified. She had seen the look on his face. "Get away from the door right now. Call the cops." Her panic snapped him out of it. He backed away from the window as his grandma, now in a full state of terror, fumbled with the phone, her trembling voice recounting the nightmare to a 911 dispatcher. Aiden, meanwhile, couldn't look away. He moved to another window, one with a better angle, the cold glass a stark contrast to his clammy hand. He watched the man. He just stood there for what felt like an eternity, a void in human form. Aiden would later say something that has never left me. He said, the blackness of the man's figure standing out, there was the only thing darker than the surrounding ambience. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure began to move. He didn't run. He walked. He circled the house, a predator assessing its cage, and then simply disappeared into the tree line, swallowed by the darkness he seemed to be made of. Minutes later, the night was torn apart by flashing red and blue lights. Two police cruisers crunched up the gravel driveway. The relief was immediate, a wave of warmth washing over the cold fear. The officers were calm, professional. They listened to Aiden's story, to his grandma's frantic retelling. Then they began their search. Flashlight beams cut through the yard, sweeping across the dark porch, probing the empty Morton building. Aiden and his family watched from the window as the officers searched every corner, their heavy boots moving with purpose. But there was nothing. No footprints they could make out, no disturbed branches. No sign of anyone. The man was gone. As if he had never been there at all. An officer came back to the door. "We searched the whole property," he said, his tone reassuring but firm. "There's nobody out there now. But you did the right thing calling us. Just keep your doors locked tight tonight." And just like that, they were gone. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before. The house was secure, the police had come, and the threat was gone. At least, that's what they were supposed to believe. But what happens when the threat isn't a shadow in the darkness, but a stranger standing under the bright lights of a family resort? When the danger isn't hiding, but standing right next to you. This story comes from a listener who was 14 at the time, on vacation in the Bahamas. Imagine it. The air is thick with salt and the smell of coconut sunscreen. Music is playing by the pool, and the afternoon sun is warm on your skin. She was with her family friends, getting a temporary henna tattoo near the lobby, laughing, feeling that perfect, carefree vacation buzz. She vaguely noticed a man lingering nearby, but in a crowded resort, your mind just dismisses it. He's just another guest, another tourist. Later, she headed back to her room alone. She pushed the call button for the elevator, and when the doors slid open with a soft chime, he was already inside. The same man. Her stomach did a little flip, but she stepped in. "It's a public space, right?" She pressed the button for her floor. The doors slid shut, sealing them in the small, sterile box, and then she waited. She watched the panel, waiting for him to press his own button. He didn't. He just stood there, silent. The alarm bells in her head weren't just ringing anymore, they were screaming. But what could she do? She was trapped in a metal box with him, suspended between floors. When the doors opened on her floor, she practically bolted out, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't look back, but she could feel him behind her. The hallway, once just a simple path to her room, now felt a mile long, an empty, silent runway. She could hear his footsteps, a steady 10 feet behind her. Not fast, not slow. Just there. She fumbled for her key card, her hands shaking. Just a few more feet. Just a few more doors, and that's when the footsteps quickened. He ran. He grabbed her from behind, one hand clamping over her arm. Primal fear took over. She kicked, and she screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed in the empty hall. The shock of her resistance seemed to work. He dropped her, and in that split second, she scrambled the last few feet, swiped the card, and threw herself into the safety of her room, slamming the door shut. Security later found him, and they confirmed he'd been seen following other young women all day. He wasn't just a tourist. He was a hunter. In the Bahamas, hunter was caught, the door was slammed shut, the danger locked out. But for Aiden, back in that quiet Vermont house, the real danger had already been invited inside. The police had left. The woods had fallen silent, and for a brief, blissful hour, a fragile sense of normalcy returned. It was just after 10 o'clock. Upstairs, the soft glow of the television painted the walls in shifting colors. Aiden and his brothers were huddled around the GameCube, the familiar, cheerful music of a video game filling the room. The clicking of the controllers, the low murmur of their voices, it was a sound of safety. A sound of home. They let themselves believe the strange man was gone, that their grandmother had overreacted, that the night was once again theirs. And then, a sound from downstairs shattered it all. It wasn't a bump, or a crash. It was a raw, primal noise that ripped through the peaceful atmosphere of the old house. It was their grandmother's heart-chilling scream. Controllers were dropped, chairs were knocked over. In a single, shared heartbeat of terror, the three boys scrambled out of the room. Their feet thundered down the wooden staircase in a chaotic stampede, a desperate rush toward the source of that awful sound. They found her in the den, standing frozen. Her face was a mask of pure horror, one trembling hand pointing toward the pitch-black doorway of her office. Her voice was a strangled whisper. There was someone in there. Aiden didn't think. He acted. He lunged forward, slamming the heavy office door shut. The latch clicked with a shared, unspoken command. He and his brothers threw their weight against the wood, their shoulders digging into the frame, their bodies forming a desperate, living barricade on the other side of the room. Their grandmother was on the phone with 911 again, her voice cracking as she relayed the nightmare. For the boys, there was only the door, the strain in their muscles, and the suffocating silence from the other side. A silence that was infinitely more terrifying than any sound could be. The minutes stretched into an eternity before the familiar red and blue lights once again washed over the windows. The police were back. The boys stepped away from the door, their limbs trembling with adrenaline. An officer, hand resting on his weapon, cautiously pushed the door open. He swept the beam of his flashlight into the darkness. The cone of light sliced through the pitch-black room. It slid over a filing cabinet, a desk stacked with papers, the worn leather of a reading chair, and then, the couch. The beam froze. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't crouched in a corner. The man from the porch was there. He was laying on their grandmother's office couch, hands behind his head as if he was simply resting after a long day. The police dragged him out, this ghost who had haunted their evening. He didn't fight. He was chillingly calm, and when they asked him what he was doing, he was very open about his intentions. He said he'd found an unlocked window and simply came inside to spend the night in the warmth of the house. That ghost was caught. The door was locked. But the feeling of safety, that was gone forever. And sometimes, the intruder isn't a ghost you can catch. Sometimes, it's a presence that just exists, right on the edge of your senses in a place you paid to feel safe. This last story comes from a listener who simply wanted a romantic weekend away with his partner. They chose a rustic, old-fashioned mountain resort. You can picture it, can't you? The scent of pine in the air, a huge stone fireplace crackling in the lobby, the promise of quiet nights and starry skies. Their suite was perfect, old wooden floors, a two-room layout, and a wide window with a view of the darkening forest. It was a perfect escape until the smell started. A strange, sour odor that hung in the air. He described it as skunky, deeply out of place in their clean room. They opened a window, tried to blame it on something outside, and did their best to ignore it. Then came the sound. A soft, but consistent, thud. It seemed to be coming from the second, unused bedroom of their suite. Thud, a long pause, then thud again. It wasn't the random groan of old pipes. It felt deliberate. He noticed a pattern. Whenever they would talk or move around, it would stop. The moment the room fell silent again, it would begin. Thud, the thud. Like something was waiting, listening. Finally, he'd had enough. He grabbed a heavy broom from the closet, his heart pounding a little faster. He pushed open the door to the second room and flipped on the light. Nothing, just a neatly made bed and an empty armoire. He poked under the bed with the broom, checked the closet. Nothing. The sound was gone. A wave of relief washed over him. He felt a little foolish. It was just an old building making old building noises. He switched off the light and was turning to leave the darkened room back to the safety of his partner. And that's when he saw it, just for a second, through his peripheral vision. A very tall, black figure. An object, a shape, standing in the corner of the room he had just searched. It wasn't a shadow. It was a void, a shape whose blackness was the only thing darker than the surrounding gloom. He froze. Every hair on his body stood on end. He and his partner quietly left the suite and called the front desk from the hallway. Minutes later, the owner of the resort arrived. And he was carrying a gun. The owner listened to their frantic story, his expression grimly calm, and then he told them the truth. He said they'd been having some trouble. He said there had actually been some creeps coming to the resort from the surrounding woods, sneaking into people's rooms at night to steal food. A grandma's house in Vermont. A sun-drenched resort in the Bahamas. A quiet suite in the mountains. 3 places that should have been sanctuaries. 3 havens, violated because the real horror isn't just the confrontation, it's the ghost it leaves behind. The fear that never quite fades. After their ordeal, Aiden mentioned that the event made his grandmother that much more paranoid with just about everything. The intruder leaves, but the feeling of being unsafe in your own home stays. These stories show us how fragile our sense of security truly is, and it makes me wonder about your story. Has a place you thought was safe ever suddenly felt dangerous? Share your own close call in the comments below. We read every single one. These accounts are important because they're real. If you agree these stories need to be heard, hit the like button and subscribe for more true horror. We share the experiences others are too afraid to, which is why videos like this can get taken down at any time. So please, hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.